It's not quite officially summer, but the Memorial Day weekend represents the beginning of the summer season for many Americans, and that means many things, like backyard barbecues and ball games, and both of those, of course, mean hot dogs. According to the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, and yes, there's a National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, Americans will consume some 20 billion hot dogs this year, roughly 70 each. The history of the hot dog goes back a lot farther than you might think, and how it becomes such an American icon with an almost disturbing number of regional varieties is intimately linked to American culture and history. Whether you like them boiled or grilled, with chili or sauerkraut or mustard or, blasphemy to some, ketchup, the history of the hot dog is a history of modern America.
Sausage making, the process where ground meat, usually along with salt and spices, is pressed into a casing, traditionally animal intestine, is an efficient means of preserving food, especially scraps that otherwise might be hard to cook or serve. Sausages were preserved by various means, cured, dried, or smoked, although some are made without any method of preservation and would have been cooked or consumed immediately. It's unclear when sausage was invented. In his 2009 book Hot Dog, A Global History, food historian Dr. Bruce Craig notes that the first chopped or processed meat encased in gut was the ancestral sausage. He argues that archaeological evidence suggests this kind of food dates as far back as the Upper Paleolithic era, some 20,000 years ago. Sausages were certainly a part of culture in antiquity. A 1999 article in the journal Greek, Roman, and Byzantine Studies called Sausage and Meat Preservation in Antiquity remarks to salt mince meat and fat and stuff it into casings was a convenient way to give leftovers some shelf life. It also had the advantage of concealing from the squeamish exactly what the contents were. A 1985 article in the journal Biblical Archaeologist notes that a brief satirical text reveals that the Mesopotamians knew how to fill intestines with a forcemeat of some kind, prompting the authors to ask, is it too much to credit these people with the earliest form of sausage? If so, then it isn't clear what kind of meat was used or how it was preserved, but the text, written in cuneiform, suggests that some version of sausage was being produced as much as 5,000 years ago. A Greek comedy written by Epicharmus of Kos, approximately 2,600 years ago, called The Aurea, is sometimes literally translated as the sausage, although the text of the play has been lost. Sausage is frequently referenced in Greek and Roman works, including in Homer's Odyssey. In fact, the etymology of the modern word sausage traces back to an archaic Latin word meaning seasoned with salt. As to the nature of sausage in antiquity, Greek, Roman, and Byzantine studies speculates from how sausage is discussed in Greek and Roman literature that we conclude that sausage must have been a cheap and common snack for the crowds coming and going into the city, and that from time immemorial, sausages were made of the cheapest leftovers and were easy to adulterate. They note that one text implied that the sausage maker mixes dog and donkey meat into his sausages, but the author also speculates that pork would have been the most common meat used. And while sausage might have been a common food made from the cheapest leftovers, recipes are recorded in ancient texts that were intended as haute cuisine for the wealthy.
A cookbook by the Roman gourmet Apicius, which was thought to have been compiled around 500 AD, included a recipe for brain sausage. In the mortar put pepper, lovage, and origany, moisten with broth and rub. Add cooked brains, and mix diligently until there be no lumps.
Sausage was a common food in medieval Europe for both high and low classes, and many recipes still exist. Sausages were most often, but not exclusively, made from pork and were a means of preserving meat through winter. Recipes for sausages are also found in this area in China. Some recipes incorporated grains or fruits as well. Haggis, presumed to have originated in Scotland, although similar dishes were found elsewhere and date back to ancient times, combines cooked ground sheep heart, lungs, and liver with oatmeal and suet, and the traditional casing is a sheep's bladder. In the Americas, pemmican is made of dried meat combined with fat and sometimes dried fruit. In Europe, German culture especially developed sausage. A blog post on the website of Fresh Meals explains that sausage was a means of survival for Germans during the winter months. Germany was particularly suited to sausage making because it has mountainous regions where the drier northern winds helped in the curing process. Moreover, in warmer European countries, food was more available, so sausage making never became as popular. By the 14th century, recipes for bratwurst started to appear in Germany, although there's a disagreement whether the food originated in Franconia or Thuringia. And some even argued originated earlier with the Celts. There are many regional styles of bratwurst, which might be made with beef, pork, veal, or a mix of any of the three. Bratwurst tends to use coarsely ground meat, and typically the links of sausage are relatively thick and long. Thus, bratwurst adds texture to meals, and its size means that it is a significant part of a meal. This contrasts with the Frankfurter. As the name implies, the city of Frankfurt claims to have invented this type of sausage. They date the invention to the year 1487, and in 1987 celebrated the 500th birthday of its introduction. Thus, this traditional American dish was invented 5 years ahead of Columbus's discovery of the Americas. However, CNN noted in a July 2020 story that hot dog historians argue that sausage culture, native to Eastern Europe and particularly Germany, has no specific town of origin. Frankfurters or wieners differ from bratwurst. They are smaller, thinner, and have a smoother skin than bratwurst. Originally made from pork or pork and beef mixtures, they are slow cooked or smoked and flavored, usually with coriander. Whereas bratwurst is coarse and adds texture, the meat of a Frankfurter is more finely ground and the texture smooth. Craig explains that these types of sausages came to the United States from immigrants in the mid and late 19th century. He rejects the idea that the U.S. hot dog life was tied, however, to a specific inventor or region. Rather, he notes that several sausage traditions have influenced the modern American hot dog. Sausage vendors could be found in places like markets and fairs throughout Europe from the Middle Ages to the present. Naturally, immigrants took their food traditions with them, and it is these sausages, particularly the German ones, that became the American hot dog. But notably, Craig points out that the hot dog, as it is known today, is the result of processing technology that was developed during the 19th century, becoming, he says, an emulsified food. And thus, he says, the hot dog has a cultural and social history all its own. The German tradition of selling sausages at public events like fairs and markets fit with the American culture in the city, and vendors began selling sausages from push carts wherever Germans immigrated. Such carts might have been around as early as the 1840s, but Craig observes certainly by the 1860s. Such carts became particularly popular in the bustling streets of New York City. CNN Travel quotes Coney Island historian Michael Quinn. The advantage of having a hot sausage on an elongated bun is a very New York thing. New Yorkers like to walk and eat. It was there that an entrepreneur named Charles Feltman would help to popularize the Frankfurter sausage. Born in 1851, Feltman had immigrated to the United States in 1856. In 1867, he began operating a pushcart wagon selling food to beachgoers at New York City's Coney Island. According to a pamphlet on Coney Island food published in 1997, in 1867, Charles Feltman owned a pie wagon that delivered his freshly baked pies to the inns and lager beer saloons that lined Coney Island's beaches. His clients also wanted hot sandwiches to serve to their customers, but his wagon was small, and he knew it would be hard to manage making a variety of sandwiches in a confined space. He thought that perhaps something simple, like a hot sausage served on a roll, might be the solution. He presented his problem to Donovan, the wheelwright at East New York and Howard Street in Brooklyn, who had built his pie wagon. The man saw no problem in building a tin-lined chest to keep the rolls fresh and rigging a small charcoal stove inside to boil sausages. Their sausages and easily held buns became very popular, as New York historian Henry Collins Brown wrote in his 1928 book In the Golden 90s. It could be carried on the barge, eaten on the sands between baths, consumed on a carousel, used as a baby's nipple to quiet an obstreperous infant, and had other economic appeals to the summer pleasure seeker. Eventually, Feltman built a restaurant complex that helped to popularize both the food and Coney Island as an entertainment area. CNN Travel wrote in 2020, in 1875, Feltman convinced president of the Prospect Park Railroad, Andrew Culver, to run the subway line down to Coney Island, offering public transportation to thousands of New Yorkers who had never before had access to the far reaches of Brooklyn. But it was actually a former employee turned competitor who would have the biggest influence on the connection between hot dogs and Coney Island. Nathan Handwerker was a Polish immigrant who worked for Feltman as a bun slicer. When he left to start his own business in 1916, he undersold Feltman, selling his sausages for 5 cents when Feltman charged 10. Handwerker sausages became the more popular of the two, and his restaurant, Nathan's Famous, became a Coney Island landmark. Another important point in the history of the hot dog, according to the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, was during the year 1893, as the convenient and inexpensive food was sold at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, where its popularity helped to establish it as a staple American food. Also in 1893, Christopher Vanderai, owner of the St. Louis professional baseball team the Brown Stockings, started selling hot dogs at games. In 1882, Van der Eye purchased the bankrupt team, which had been rocked by a game-fixing scandal, for just $1,800. A saloon owner, he expected to earn his money back not just through ticket sales, but from the sales of beer. Eventually, he surrounded his ballpark with an amusement park, racetrack, and beer garden. While it's difficult to document, he is generally credited with being the first to sell Frankfurter sausages at baseball games, founding the connection between America's iconic food and its iconic sport. 1893 also represented another watershed for the convenient food, as that is, according to Craig, the first time the name hot dog was known to have been used in print to refer to the sausage. The Knoxville Journal wrote, even the Wienerwurst men were preparing the hot dogs for sale Saturday night. Previously, the food had gone by several names: Frankfurters, Wieners, Red Hots, Vienna sausages. The connection to dogs had actually already been made, as the long, thin sausage bore a passing resemblance to the small German dog breed, the Dachshund, which had been imported to America at nearly the same time and by the same immigrants as the sausages. Thus, early on, they were often called a Dachshund sausage. There are numerous legends about how the food got its more popular name. In one, the name was supposedly coined by a sports cartoonist for the New York Journal named Tad Dorgan. According to the legend, in 1901, he saw vendors selling Dachshund sausages at New York's Polo Grounds Stadium. He drew a cartoon depicting little dogs in buns, but unsure of how to spell Dachshund, he instead called them hot dogs. However, the story is doubtful. Craig notes that the supposed comic has never been found, and as the Knoxville Journal demonstrated, the term was in use prior to the time when that cartoon was supposed to have been drawn. Another legend, printed in a 1924 edition of the Brooklyn Standard Union, suggests that the term was coined on Coney Island, but in the 1600s, when island natives, possibly Iroquois, served Henry Hudson a traditional feast of a cooked fat dog. It's a pretty safe bet, the paper writes, that at this feast the phrase hot dog was coined. The story appears to be tongue-in-cheek, but the paper did note that the hot dog of today is wildly different than that of several hundred years ago. Instead of these explanations, King contends that the name began around college campuses in the 1890s, where vendor carts were commonly called dog stands. It might have been partially derived from the resemblance to the dachshund, but following the American sense of humor, the term hot dog also likely referenced the dubious provenance of the meat inside the casing. The name did take some time, however, to become universally accepted. A 1923 edition of the Kansas City Star explains that, when asked, vendors of the treat objected, preferring the name Frankfurter or Coney Islands. The name hot dogs, they complained, was a gross libel on the dependable cow and hog, and on the dependable, sturdy Frankfurter. Another hot dog myth has to do with the bun. One popular story says that in 1904, a Bavarian concessionaire named Aaron Fuchswager sold hot dogs at the St. Louis Exposition. He would give each person a white glove to hold the hot sausage, but the gloves often were not returned. Thus, he started selling them in convenient buns, which proved very popular. Again, the myth simply doesn't meet reality. Sausages and buns were being sold at Coney Island at least a decade ahead of 1904. In fact, Craig notes that Germans traditionally ate the sausages on bread, and that the tradition simply came along with the sausage.
While there are many legends about the development of what is possibly America's most iconic food, food historians tell us that hot dogs were not the product of a single inventor or entrepreneur, but rather were brought here by immigrants from many places. Became particularly popular in the bustling late 19th century and early 20th century America because they were convenient and inexpensive because of industrial production.
Over time, hot dogs have developed several regional styles, from the familiar New York dog with mustard and sauerkraut or grilled onions to the Chicago style with fresh tomato, pickles, onions, and relish. The reason fans of Chicago dogs so abhor ketchup is that the tart flavor is provided by the fresh tomatoes and the sweet flavor from the relish. Detroit-style dogs are served with a beef chili, and San Francisco's are wrapped in smoky bacon. In fact, there are nearly as many styles of hot dogs as there are cities in which they are served. One persistent question about hot dogs is the conundrum that hot dogs are usually sold in packs of 10, while hot dog buns are sold in packs of 8. California news station KSBY explains that buns are usually baked in clusters of 4 pans designed to hold 8 rolls, while hot dogs are sold in packs of 10 because 10 hot dogs is roughly 1 pound. Despite their history of dubious ingredients, hot dogs in the U.S. today are regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. The type of protein used must be clearly labeled. While sausages made with offal, such as lips and cheeks, are still made, those are usually made in local shops. Such items will be labeled as variety meats.
Whether boiled or grilled, there's a good chance that hot dogs will be on your menu this summer. The Hot Dog and Sausage Council estimates that hot dogs are served in 70% of American homes. And the humble sausage that is such a part of history is now a part of backyard barbecues and picnics, county fairs, and nights at the ballpark. All those moments of life that deserve to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.